The mayor of Mariupol in southern Ukraine says the city is on the brink of a humanitarian catastrophe and must be completely evacuated as soon as possible. Mariupol has endured relentless bombardment from Russian forces in recent weeks, and Mayor Vadim Boychenko says nearly 5,000 people have died and some 160,000 civilians remain in the city without any power. There is growing concern that the city could soon fall under Russian control. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense ministry says there is no evidence that Russia is planning to abandon its effort to capture the capital, Kyiv. Russian forces are also stepping up their attacks in eastern Ukraine.
For just a few brief moments, musicians provided those inside this Kharkiv metro station and bomb shelter with a brief respite from the war. Music is a ray of light that helps our souls survive. It brightens our lives, stops us panicking, and keeps away the darkness, gloom, and bitterness of this war. We all need support like never before. If we, classical musicians, can provide support to the people by playing our instruments, by doing what we can do best, we will do it anywhere. But across Ukraine, and with each day that passes, the death toll increases. This watch belonged to one of the war's victims. His son Victor witnessed his death. The Russian soldiers just started firing. I looked at my dad, looked into the car. He was already choking on his own blood. I saw 4 direct hits to the windshield. But there is a faint glimmer of hope that peace will return. Here in Kyiv, the president offered Moscow a compromise on the Donbass. This as peace talks between Russia and Ukraine are set to resume on Tuesday in Turkey. I understand it's impossible to make Russia give up the territory completely. That would lead to World War III. I understand completely. I'm aware of that. That's why I'm saying this is a compromise. But let's try to resolve the question of the Donbass, the complex question of the Donbass. But in Moscow, there appears to be no shift in Russia's demands. We have to make sure that Ukraine stops assimilating itself with the West, with NATO, in the military sense, with threats to the Russian Federation, physical military threats to the Russian Federation. Death and destruction in Ukraine. Here in Lviv, the funeral of a soldier. Another day that a family has been touched by the war.
And for the latest, we're joined now from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, by DW correspondent Matthias Berlinger. Matthias, tell us, what might a possible compromise for a ceasefire look like from a Ukrainian perspective?
Well, a compromise will be not where Ukraine sees the likely outcome. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a compromise. And I wouldn't think too much about the outcome of any of these talks right now. For now, I think this is decided on the battlefield, and any compromise will be reached when one of the sides feels the need to back down. And this is not what we are seeing right now. We have seen some readiness to talk by Russia that was in the beginning saying that they were basically just stating their demands. Zelensky has said they were basically setting an ultimatum. And we see some things that Zelensky has brought in, this neutrality issue. But also here, I wouldn't see too much of a position to give in. He has said he would be ready to discuss this, but that also this had to be confirmed in a referendum, so he would not take the responsibility for this hugely unpopular compromise that would be so hugely unpopular. I don't see that these talks are serving at anything beyond keeping the channels open, trying to feel the positions. I don't think they're going towards any result at the moment, so it doesn't make sense to talk about outcomes yet.
Give us a sense of the situation on the ground in Kyiv where you are with this new round of negotiations about to start.
Yeah, in Kyiv, the situation is unchanged. What we're hearing is that around the city in the northeast and in the northwest and in the east, yesterday there was fierce fighting. We could hear it here in the city, that the shelling was more intense than otherwise. And it's quite calm now. We've heard that Ukrainian forces have regained some territory there. Otherwise, life is going on here. The city has been surrounded from about 180 degrees, so about half of the ring of the city is closed almost since the beginning of the war, so there are not so many changes, and these negotiations, of course, people are following after them, but what's more important for their life now is what's going on in the fighting zones and what's going on in the places where the refugees come from. This is what people look at, not so much at these negotiations.
DW correspondent Matthias Böllinger reporting from Kyiv. Thank you. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has called for EU accession talks for Albania and North Macedonia to begin as soon as possible. Scholz made the comments after a meeting with Sweden's Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson here in Berlin. He said it was important that the EU sped up talks with the two Balkan nations to prevent them from being pulled into Russia's sphere of influence. Scholz and Andersson also discussed the question of Swedish neutrality as the country considers NATO membership. Andersson said its EU membership meant Sweden was no longer a neutral country. Here's German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
Magdalena and myself agree that we want to strengthen the EU and make it more resilient as well. The turning point in history is something that means we must achieve real progress within the European Union. Thus, we talked about the fact that the time has come to have the Albanian and Macedonian accession talks begin as soon as possible. Otherwise, these Balkan states will be vulnerable for Russian influencing. And we need to strengthen our capacity in a number of different ways.
DW spoke to Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson after that press conference. We asked her about Scholz's comments about EU accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. Here's what she had to say.
Well, I mean, countries should be able to join the European Union when they are ready for it. And I think it's important that all countries can have a process coming closer to a European membership. And from a Swedish perspective, we have been supporting countries, for instance, Ukraine, to help build their institutions to become, so they could come closer to becoming members of the European Union. Attacking Ukraine was not only an attack on Ukraine, but also on the European security order, which means that every country can make their decision themselves. So, of course, Sweden, we have the right to do the decision that we think is right for our country. But, of course, when we do that, we have to weigh all the different risks with the different options that we have. The situation around the Baltic Sea has changed after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We've had a deteriorating security situation around the Baltic for a long time, but this was really a shift. What we have done from a Swedish perspective during the last years is to increase our defense spending, and we will also follow Germany to go up to 2% of GDP. But we also increased our bilateral, multilateral cooperation, like being a partner to NATO. We have a very close cooperation with Finland, but also with the Joint Expeditionary Force with other countries. And we will continue in this direction. But we also have a discussion with the other parties in Parliament to analyze the situation and see what that means for how we will act in the future.
And in the Ukrainian city of Lviv is our correspondent Amyan Esif for us tonight. It's good to see you, Amyan. So we are in week 5 of this war. What is the situation there in western Ukraine?
Well, Brand, I'm actually speaking to you from the basement of the building that I'm staying in, which serves as a bomb shelter. There have been air raid sirens going off. This is the second time today, so it's the second time I've had to go down to the bomb shelter. There were strikes more than 48 hours ago around this city oil reserves from Russian missiles launched all the way from Crimea. So it has people startled here, but there haven't been any missile attacks in the city for over 48 hours. But there were reports of attacks just 150 kilometers north of here. You probably can hear kids playing around here right now. People are trying to make the best of it because this happens daily, if not more than once a day, that we have to, when the air raid sirens go, to go downstairs. But look, a lot of this is symbolic strikes from the Russian military because the real fighting is happening, the real suffering is happening in eastern Ukraine, the Donbass, Kharkiv, Mariupol, and even a lot more in Kyiv than it is here in western Ukraine, Brent.
Yeah, and Amir, hearing those children, knowing that they're sharing the same space with you in a bomb shelter, and that we're talking about war and peace, it just speaks to the brutal reality of this conflict. And what about a possible ceasefire? We know that there's at least one new idea that's being floated from the Ukrainian perspective. What can you tell us about that?
I
can
think
you
I
hear me?
lost signal. I can't hear you, Brent. Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah, the ceasefire, the possibility of ceasefire has become more real because of these comments from the Ukrainian president. Basically, what he said is that he's willing to talk. He's willing to give Ukrainian neutrality. So he has hinted before that this would be on the table. But it sounds in his remarks that this is the furthest he's gone and said that a neutrality would be an option. Of course, he said he would have to put this up to a referendum in the country. And just speaking to the people here on the ground, I don't know how many people would vote for anything that would give Russia any kind of advantage here or give them any ground. Now, the Donbass is a different question. Basically, what Zelensky said was that instead of demanding that all Russian troops leave the country, he would reset to basically February 23rd, before the complete Russian invasion of this country, and then decide the question of the Donbass after that they went back to that being the only disputed territory. But then the Russian troops would be out of the rest of the country, like in Kyiv, for example.
I mean, let me just ask you, before we run out of time, the Ukrainian government, we understand, investigating possible torture of Russian soldiers by its troops. What are the allegations?
Well, this is an interesting case, Brandon. It's also interesting to see how the Ukrainian government reacted. There were videos circulating yesterday, mostly on pro-Russian accounts on social media, showing gruesome videos. I watched this myself. I don't recommend watching it. It is truly torture if it is real. Showing videos of Ukrainian soldiers shooting Russians in the leg as soon as they got out of the truck, breaking their bones, beating them into almost so that they're unrecognizable. Now, the government first said that this was fake videos, that this was Russian disinformation, but then they said that if it were true, they're going to investigate it. They will punish anybody who is involved if it turns out to be true, because they said the Ukrainian army is a European army and they follow international standards. And this, indeed, if it was true, would be a crime and needs to be punished.
Our correspondent Amian Esif in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv tonight. Amian, thank you.